James Douglas returned from France, disinherited since his father's death as an English prisoner. He was taken in as squire by William Lamberton, Bishop of St Andrews, himself a formidable warrior and committed ally to the Scottish cause.
This is the River Tweed, and we're bang in the heart of the Stobo Valley here. Now the hamlet, parish and district of Stobo, it does seem an unlikely place for Scottish affairs during the Scottish Wars of Independence, but Bishop William Lamberton had his manor here, and it's right on the fringes of the Ettrick Forest. Of course, home to guerrilla fighters, freedom fighters, outlaws and broken men. And it's a great place for secret meetings, rendezvous, and connecting with the guerrilla fighters, relating news back and forth about what's going on in the Scottish political world at that time. James Douglas, as squire to William Lamberton, most likely spent much time up and down the stretch of the Tweed. James Douglas, by this point in his life when he returns to Scotland, is about 17, 18 years of age. Quite impressionable at that age. And obviously at the back of his mind is the fact that foreign invaders own his inheritance, his land, the castle at Douglas, and everything else that belonged to his father. Where Bishop William Lamberton's manor exactly was, we're not sure. But there are some remnants here from back in that time which we're going to visit. And certainly when the young James Douglas was squire to William Lamberton, he would have known these places well. And the first of them here is Lower, medieval fort and village. You know, to rise up early on a Sunday morning and get out here into the land and be blessed with a day such as this is simply magical. It really is. There's not much to see. You would see better with a drone. But this was once a thriving medieval village that Bishop Lamberton would have known very well. What is nice to see though, and walk amongst, are just these mounds. Mounds of what would have once been people's homes, their houses, their workshops. Some old stones there. But this was a medieval settlement, and it had its own fort and tower. And just as you climb up onto this, oh, it's beautiful. It really is. People may tell you there's nothing to see here, but there's everything. Look at all that, and you can actually picture the centre of the village, the centre of the settlement, and the small streets that lead off into it. These outer ramparts here, which no doubt protect the village, but you're up a fair old height here in the Stobo Valley, which is right in the edge of the Ettrick Forest. That's a lovely place to have a cottage. I wouldn't mind some of that. But look at the vastness of the land just round about here. The hunting back then must have been incredibly rich. It's actually quite a large area, and who knows, it may have been a village of anywhere between, I would imagine, 30, 50 people, with frequent passers-by, and you are right on the edge of the forest, so I would think you would have a few English patrol visitors, but also some of the guerrilla fighters and the freedom fighters from the forest. But you can see the outlines of the streets between the homes here. Let's just go and look at a couple of these. You're literally walking in ancient footsteps here. There would have been a house here. Small workshops, small homes. And to me, it's perfectly feasible that young James Douglas and Bishop William Lamberton, his mentor, came here, visited here, spent time here, ate, drank, and bedded themselves here. What a view, and what a thriving place this would have been at some point. When you look at the height that we are at on this side, natural defences for the village, and you have the water which flows all the way down to the River Tweed there, absolutely perfect for water supply, livestock round about it, and good hunting. It's quite surreal to walk in a place that's now fallen silent through the ages. But at one time, children played, people worked, people married, lived together and fought together and stayed alive together. This part here looks like it could have been quite a substantial building. They did certainly have a tower here, but a good number of houses here. And although Lamberton would more than likely have had his manor now right over the valley there, what you'll see directly in front of you is the modern day Stobo Castle, which is a health suite and spa. That can also be a favoured location to William Lamberton's home, but we are at about 1.5 miles from there. Old Stobo Kirk, dating from the 12th century, is just down that valley there, another side of the Tweed, which we will go and visit, and which both Douglas and Lamberton would certainly have known well. But the village really is in a beautiful location. I can just imagine Bishop William Lamberton coming up there with his young squire, the James Douglas, travelling up this pathway here, being greeted by people he knew, introducing the young James to the village. And making friends here. James Douglas had landed on his feet with William Lamberton. As we take a walk through these streets here, all things haven't ended up too good for this sheep. Well decomposed. No smell. Poor ram. That's a good horn too. But just wandering through these streets here allows you to put your imagination into flow. I mean, you see these little dugouts. Neighbours over here. And you just imagine the people back then who lived in probably a very difficult existence. You literally had to work for everything that you had. But there were no dunces. They would have grown their crops. They would have had their livestock. They would have traded. They would have been skilled. This looks like quite a thriving village. All those years ago. So the records don't tell us that William Lamberton lived in a medieval village or near. It just mentions his manor at Stobo, which indicates it was out with this village. Of course, they always have to be near water. You do have water here. You have contributory streams going into the River Tweed. I don't think Mr. Lamberton would have been too far from the River Tweed, simply for water, fishing, and any other necessities that the river has to have. Horses. They probably didn't walk this. They would more likely have come up here in a horse and cart. But it's absolutely beautiful. And it's just great to be in a place that's not really written about or recognised as back in times. Because when you research William Lamberton, it's very scanty what you can get. So you really have to sort of dig deep and get some stuff on him, but it's well worth it. And he was here. This was his manor of Stobo, and we're going to visit certainly the kirk, which I've absolutely no doubt he would have visited as a Bishop of St Andrews. It's 99.9%, in fact it's 100% likely that he visited that holy place. The earliest mention of this church is around the year 1116. Look at this beautiful Norman door here that we have. So you think 12th century, this is most definitely here. When the principal players, Lamberton, Bruce, Wallace, were all here. This is really interesting as well. These are known as jugs. Now these are chains that were used for discipline and punishment. This is a collar here. As you can see, the padlock on it. Absolutely amazing. There are not many of these things around. And quite uncomfortable to have that as a way of discipline. But coming through this beautiful Norman door here. Absolutely beautiful. And this ancient place. Where 100% Bishop Lamberton and friends would have been here. This part in here is particularly beautiful and very interesting. Look at the old altar stone that we have here. Look at that stonework. These ancient stones here. Even today, very well marked. And what's very interesting is this effigy here of a knight. This beautiful sword down here, these very knobbly knees, which would have been a suit of armour. Beautiful. Beautiful. But young James Douglas, his soon-to-be leader, Robert the Bruce, and his mentor, William Lamberton, would have walked these very floors. Is a remarkable old place. As always with any church like this, I love to climb up into the pulpit area. And just as a matter of curiosity, see what was on the agenda that day. A service is just finished. The book of Jeremiah. One can only imagine the conversations being so close to the Ettrick Forest. That happened within here. And it makes it very possible, for the amount of years that James would have spent with William Lamberton. We know that Lamberton had meetings with William Wallace. He would have had those meetings on the fringes of the Great Forest and within the Great Forest. And it's possible that he had young James with him, and that James met Wallace. The thing with Scottish church is that people like Wishart and Lamberton, naturally they would say one thing and do another. As the English noted, they would pledge fealty with their lips, but their hearts would be far removed from the English king. This part of the church down here is extremely old, but it had collapsed and it was rebuilt in 1928. But one of the oldest parts of the church. Scottish bishops were not so easy for Edward of England to deal with. The Scottish Church was separate and they wanted to keep it that way, naturally. Robert Wishart was notoriously difficult to deal with, and English would complain of him often about saying one thing and doing another. And Bishop William Lamberton was no different. I can just imagine the conversations about what was simmering below the surface with Scottish affairs that Lamberton would have had with the young Douglas. Douglas would have been extremely interested in this because it affected him and it affected his future goals. And of course they were all waiting to see what was going to happen. They knew that soon Edward would be coming north. I wonder, and I think it even highly likely, that William Lamberton would have taken the young James into some of these secret meetings, into this vast, huge area that was known as the Ettrick Forest. The early years of the 1300s would see very different change for Scotland, very dramatic change. They defeated the English in 3 encounters at the Battle of Roslin. But in 1304, slowly but surely, and in numbers, the Scottish nobles came into the peace of Edward of England. William Wallace was back in Scotland and he was on the loose. But Edward was slowly tightening his grip on the country. And here at Stirling, he laid siege to this medieval fortress for 3 months. He brought his great siege weapons. Robert the Bruce was even commanded and in charge of delivering them here to the siege. When the garrison surrendered, Edward I would not have it. Not until he had unleashed his medieval pride, his great weapon, the war wolf. Edward even escaped death on a couple of occasions here. Such was a stroke of luck that haunted Edward's life. After the capitulation of the castle, Edward held an assembly here at Stirling. And Bishop William Lamberton brought the young James so that he could be brought before Edward. He sought out Edward in a plea to have his lands and property restored to him. But when Edward found out that young James was the son of William Douglas, the man who had caused Edward so much anguish, was a thorn in the side for him, Edward grew heated and he dismissed young James from the court. If James Douglas had any doubts as to the restoration of his lands and property, they were crushed at this meeting with Edward Plantagenet. He would go back with William Lamberton, work with him, wait on him, and bide his time. But under the scenes, Bishop William Lamberton and Robert the Bruce were making very different plans, very secret plans of their own, which would unravel themselves in due course. Not long after, William Wallace would be captured and executed the following year. Edward suddenly found that he had the entire Scottish nobility in his grasp. Scotland had been brought to heel, or had it. News would be forthcoming to William Lamberton and to the young James, and that news would map out his life in his journey to come. After James Douglas's rebuke by King Edward I at Stirling, he would come back here, probably privately, furious, that he had been rebuked, turned back, insulted even, and left Stirling, striveling, knowing that he had no hope as things stood of regaining his lands and his inheritance. A couple of years would pass after 1304 and James Douglas's rebuke by King Edward I of England. Lamberton would approach James with letter, news of a grave incident that had happened in the town of Dumfries. King Robert the Bruce had murdered his rival John Comyn and was making a bid for the throne. This was it. This was James's opportunity. That's what he was waiting for. And he devised a plan with Bishop Lamberton. Lamberton gave him a horse. Barber tells us that the name of the horse was Ferrand. He also supplied him with money. But James had to take the horse as if it was stolen, which would free up Lamberton from being involved in any plot. James would get into a fight with the groom in the stables, mount that horse, and he would take off. He would seek to reconcile himself with King Robert the Bruce. And it would not be long before he would see the action that he craved for. As always, friends, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, but above all, subscribe. Thank you for helping the channel grow.
Join me in the next episode that sees Douglas reconciled with Robert the Bruce, and what happens when Edward I raises the dreaded dragon against the Scots insurgents.